Esther watched the three beings moving around the craft, one gathering rocks just outside of it. She tried to move forward to get a closer look, move down to the crossroads where the strange scene was unfolding. But her old yellow dog, George, wouldn't let her, pushing her back to the house, away from the disturbance. Well, good evening to all of my fellow tinfoil hats. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we will be discussing the fascinating case of the Rosedale Crossroads trio. On June 7, 1971, a woman by the name of Esther Clappison was relaxing in her home at around 8:50 in the evening. Esther shared a home with her brother Bill just on the outskirts of Rosedale, Alberta, Canada. Rosedale is a small hamlet of about 300 people today, part of the amalgamation of communities that makes up the town of Drumheller in Canada. Drumheller boomed with the coal industry now replaced by natural gas and oil and dinosaurs. It's located in Red Deer River Valley, which is also known as Dinosaur Valley, which is pretty neat. And even pretty neater than that is the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, which is Canada's largest collection of dinosaur fossils. And Drumheller also has, quote, the world's largest dinosaur, a huge fiberglass T-Rex that you can apparently even climb up like into the mouth of for a viewing area, kind of like Pee-wee's Big Adventure style, though sadly the attraction is set to close in 2029. So run, don't walk to visit Drumheller before then, folks. Now, dinosaur segue aside, the area of Drumheller Rosedale is located in the Badlands of Alberta, boasting a landscape of eerie, otherworldly, erosion carved sedimentary rock shaped into things called hoodoos or fairy chimneys. And it was in this area that Esther and Bill Clappison lived. Nearing 9 o'clock in the evening of June 7th, 1971, Esther noticed a light coming in one of the windows of the house. It was a full moon that night, but this wouldn't account for just the sheer intensity of this bright light that was streaming into the home. So she went out onto the front porch, accompanied by her old yellow dog, George, when she saw the source of this weird light. Sitting about 200 feet away from the house at the intersection of two dirt roads was this lighted rectangular object sitting on the ground. Esther said that the craft stood about 8 feet high by 5 feet wide. However, this object almost appeared kind of like a doll's house, with like one side kind of sheared off. The part facing Esther was open, and she could see the interior of the object. This was the source of light, was the bright interior of this object, which was so bright that it illuminated the road and also apparently streamed in through the windows. And not only were the lights on, but somebody was home. Actually, a couple of somebodies. In the glow of the object, Esther claimed that she could see these two human-like figures, a little under 5 feet in height. A third being was outside of the object, as she said, busying itself with something across the road. She described these beings as wearing close-fitting diving suit-like outfits of olive green, which extended all the way over their faces. However, she made out what she described as keyhole-like eyes. She said that they appeared to be wearing pointed mittens, which for some reason is just a really creepy sounding phrase. Apparently, Esther must have been at least somewhat interested in the UFO field because she claimed to remember a tip from one of Canadian investigator Bill Allen's UFO broadcasts, where he told witnesses to keep an eye out for instrument panels. So that's what she did. Her first order of business was to, see the location of this panel and take down a mental description of it. And lo and behold, just as she started looking for it, there it was at the far end of the object. However, she said that it was like one of the beings inside the object realized it was being watched, and furthermore seemed to realize how important this instrument panel was because it immediately covered up as much of this panel as it could by standing against it and like stretching its arm over it, kind of cartoonishly glancing back at the panel to make sure that it was covering up as much of the info or instruments or whatever as it possibly could. In one of the illustrations, you can actually see here that the artist even took the liberty of naming it Control Panel with Splotch, which is kind of funny. The one covering the panel then motioned to the other being that was inside the craft, who leaned out of the object to seemingly attract the attention of the being across the road. I would make a why did the UFO not cross the road joke here, but apparently Esther already thought she knew why. She claimed that this being outside of the craft was plucking samples of rocks from the ground. She was very specific that it wasn't taking dirt samples, it wasn't like scooping, it was plucking these rocks from the ground. Esther wanted to get closer to this thing to get a better look at whatever was going on, but her dog George apparently wouldn't let her. George actually pushed her back away from it, back towards the house. So Esther decided that maybe this was a sign and it was probably a good time to go and get her brother so that he could also see the object and the strange beings. However, as soon as she went inside and looked out the window to kind of be like, hey, there it is, look at this thing, she said that everything, beings, rectangular object, even the light, was simply gone. I can't say, however, that it vanished without a trace because technically there was a trace. In the ground where it was at this intersection was a blackened rectangular scorch mark, about 20 feet long, which even 4 months later, when Canadian researcher Bill Allen, the same one that had discussed the importance of the control panel on the radio, when Bill Allen showed up to look at it, the mark was still there. So this is a nifty little case and encompasses a lot of very high strangeness details. As I've said a million times before, light was really the initiating force in this encounter. This was how Esther first noticed that there was some disturbance, some anomaly, and was also what drew her outside to witness the event itself. Although this case is couched in highly spacey details, such as the control panel or the diving suit clad entities, I will say that a lot of the core elements are just the thinnest of veils over highly folkloric concepts or supernatural concepts. If you phrase it this way, a woman sees a light on the night of a full moon, then, she looks down and sees three beings at a crossroads. Her dog shows immense fear towards them. You could implement vampires or even demons or, whatever you want to put there, equally as effectively as what she claimed, which is that they were spacemen. Their drab green coloration calls to mind classic encounters of fairies in their very often green dress. And of course, Crossroads are one of those liminal spaces so very popular with any upstanding denizen of the other world. I will zoom in, speaking of liminal spaces, onto one key detail, see what I did there, about the beings. The odd descriptor of their eyes as being keyhole shaped. The concept of a keyhole kind of implies a doorway, yet another liminal space that holds strong symbolism in the human mind. However, in my opinion, it's of note here that the object itself had no door, no obstruction, it was totally open, and it was the entities themselves that possessed this symbolism. The symbol of the keyhole also being in the eyes kind of doubles down on the concept, too, of the eyes of the paranormal entities being the important part. We also have this common motif of sample taking, in this case specifically rock gathering, which here is really just a step away from the mining options of many members of the fairy faith. To name a few, there's the German kobold, the Welsh koblin, and the Cornish tommyknockers, popularized, no doubt, by Stephen King's truly horrifying alien book of the same name. The tommyknockers are also still really well known in the folklore of southwestern Wisconsin, where a lot of Cornish people worked the various mines. However, in this case specifically with the rock gathering, and by extension then a lot of the mining operations and the rock gathering in that sense throughout folklore, I kind of wonder if it's almost a connection to cairns, this very human behavior of gathering and stacking stones to commemorate either sacred locations or the dead. Although cairn is an Irish name, piles or stacks of stones to mark the dead or places of sacred or other significance, this appears all over the world and goes all the way back to prehistory. So again, it's a very old human symbol that, potentially it might be a little bit of a stretch, but we could kind of see the connection here. But I mean, again, maybe a bit of a stretch, but hey, do you see where the spacemen take their rocks? The dog reaction in this is also of note. Esther wanted to go take a better look, but her dog George prevented her from doing so. Again, dogs so often react this way. Again, they can have other reactions as well, but they seem to have just a strong emotional reaction, whether running to or running from any sort of paranormal phenomena, well, whether we're talking ghosts, spacemen, or Bigfoot. We have to wonder, in this case, if Esther had actually made it closer to the object, would it just have vanished like she claimed it did? Would the encounter have continued, maybe escalated, or a creepy thought, would Esther have vanished with it? It is apparent that Esther had at least a passing interest in the UFO mystery, due to her looking for a control panel on the advice of Bill Allen on that radio show. However, an interest in the paranormal, to me, it doesn't really lead me to just discounting a paranormal experience out of hand. I mean, anybody can have a paranormal experience, even people who are interested in the paranormal. Now, if we are to put this firmly in the category of subjective, because it's true, this she had an interest in UFOs, we can presume. The case feels very like hardcore ufological, very spacey. So if we tried to put it like, okay, it was just a subjective experience, some sort of hallucination, we have that tricky rectangle of burnt earth, visible still 4 and even 5 months after the event, to contend with and kind of corroborate what she claimed to have seen. Now, to be totally clear though, I do think that Esther's interest did have something to do with the event, but I think it had more to do with the kind of the clothing of the event in the guise of space aliens rather than manufacturing or creating the event herself. The weirdest, clearest example of this, in my opinion, is that pesky control panel. She expected it, she looked for it, she saw it, and the moment that she laid her eyes on it, the being very ostensibly, almost cartoonishly, began covering it up. Combined with the keyhole eyes, this seems indicative of a certain motif of locked or forbidden or arcane information, just barely visible to the witness, and not ever really in its entirety. We have seen occurrences like this before. It's actually a very common trope, especially usually with physical evidence or perceived physical evidence, where witnesses are offered something, an object usually that is then yanked from them at the last minute. I think that regardless of your thoughts on the interrupted journey or the Hill incident, the trope is extremely clearly observed in Betty's claims of receiving a book as proof of her encounter. She's told by one entity that she can take it, and then at the last minute, the book is taken away from her because the rest of the entities didn't want her to have it. If this was simply an artifact of hypnosis or part of the experience, to me is immaterial, as it's obviously important to the human mind, evidenced beyond the Hill case in its commonality across myth and folklore as well. You can't take gold from fairyland, Tantalus can't take nectar from the gods, just as Betty Hill can't take the book from the Zeta Reticulans, and Esther couldn't look at the control panel on the keyhole eyed people's ship. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Rosedale Crossroads trio, please like. And if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. Check that out for the works cited for this and all of my other episodes. And please tune into the podcast Somewhere in the Skies, not only for the very best and anomalous listening, but also for audio versions of my episodes. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Do